Good afternoon, everybody. Good to see y'all. Welcome back to the Beit Midrash. Lovely to get ready to learn with y'all. And if you need book recommendations and reading recommendations, talk to this group offline. They have a good list for you. At least I think they think it's a good list. I haven't read the book, so I can't testify, but it sounds like a good list. Welcome back. Last week we got through Parshat Bereshit. Which means we're still a week behind. So we're going to try to catch up with Noach and Lech Lecha, and that way we're back on the Torah cycle. And then next week we can do Vayera, and we'll kind of go from there. Good. Excellent. So just to start off, any reactions to Rabbi Sacks's conversation on Parshat Noach? Any thoughts, reflections? Anything stand out to y'all? All y'all, I should say.
I could repeat what Mickey said last week. Now he's talking about people. And
well, now there are people to talk about. But beyond Adam and Eve, there's more people. Yes.
Yeah. So people and people's interactions.
So my mother-in-law's favorite statement was, "People are people." So, Rabbi, would you agree that people are people? I mean, people that populate the earliest parts of the Torah are just people that, and you can think about them like you would think about people today?
Yes, and I would actually make the argument that not just the earliest parts of the Torah, but one of the things that makes the Bible so enduring is that everybody's flawed, everybody has problems, everybody reacts so humanly to what's going on around them. I always think of comparison with like Greek mythology. All right, Greek mythology, all the heroes are big and strong and powerful and smart and perfect, except for like one little flaw, right? You look at biblical heroes, they all have like real life issues and real life flaws and they're not perfect beings. They're not perfect people. They're people who are going through life and trying to make sense of it and trying to build a relationship with God that will help them make sense of it, which is what we do also.
I might mention this, that we just got back from Japan, and one of the cultural ideas in Japan is the idea of wabi-sabi. So, and wabi-sabi really translates down to things are most beautiful when they're imperfect. Everything has flaws, but if something is perfect, really perfect, it doesn't have the same beauty. It's not the same natural appearance as something that is wabi-sabi.
Yes. Perfection is overrated.
Except in my wife.
You're a good husband, Stuart.
He's a smart man.
Hope she's there to hear you.
Yes, Cindy.
So, I mean, I can't help reading this through the lens. I mean, everybody's tired of talking about what's going on in the world today, but so the life-changing idea for Noah is next time you meet someone radically unlike you, try seeing difference not as a threat, but as an enlarging possibility, creating gift. And I try to live my life like that. I taught that to my children, but when I read that today, like how does one read this parsha and this message and then deal with people that are like doing bad things in the world? I mean, how do you deal with that?
Well,
Was somebody going to chime in? Because it sounded like it, but
I think you're jumping ahead with your question. I think you have to get more personal. First, you have to really get to know people that are different than you are. To understand them, you have to know them, to know their life history and what they went through, and to really be friends before you start. You can't jump to after there's a problem.
Yes, I understand what you're saying, and to have those conversations and to have those relationships. And yes, when I do have those conversations and I do have those relationships, I do appreciate people for who they are and what they bring to the table. But what happens when we can't have those conversations?
Sometimes you're going to be disappointed.
so, maybe let's back up first a little bit, and then, as maybe that will help us guide into the answer to your question, because it's not an easy question, and it is posing a challenge as a whole right now. So what's the basis of Rabbi Sacks' argument?
We're all created in God's image.
Okay. However, but there's a caveat to that. Is that, as he says, that, we learned that people were created in God's image in Bereshit, right? So 2 weeks ago. And God wipes out the earth through the flood, and then tells Noah almost identically the same thing as God told Adam. But he points out two differences. So what's different about Noah than about Adam? You don't have to raise your hand.
Okay.
Well, but
Just don't step over. I was going to say don't step over.
So he talks about the importance of in between good and the covenant, and he talks about the difference between seeing God's image, oneself as being in the image of God, as opposed to seeing, or not opposed to, but in this chapter he deals with seeing the other people as being also made in the image of God.
Good. My teacher, Rabbi Brad Artson, uses the Noah story a lot in his teaching of process theology, that in arguing that God is not static or unchanging, but that God's relationship with us evolves as we evolve over time. And this is part of it, is, when God created Adam, the world was good. God created a good world. In fact, it was very good when God created people. But through human agency, God learned, well, maybe these people aren't quite as good inclined as I had thought, that they actually have they wrestle with this good and this evil, and they're not naturally always good, that they have choices to make and they sometimes choose the wrong choice. And so God starts over again, but rather than basing it on good, God bases it on relationship, on covenant. And it says that through covenant and relationship with other people, that's the basis of how this world actually works. I really love this middle paragraph on page 10 of Genesis 1 tells me that I am in the image of God. Genesis 9 tells me the other person is in the image of God. Genesis 1 speaks about the dominance of Homo sapiens over the rest of creation. Genesis 9 speaks about the sanctity of life and the prohibition of murder. The first chapter tells us about the potential power of human beings, while the 9th chapter tells us about the moral limits of that power. So human beings can't just do whatever we want because God created us as good. There's a limit, and there's a moral limit to what God actually wants us to do. And that's part of what God does in this parsha, is God puts limits on humanity. And the rabbis will say that they're in part of this is God creates 7 mitzvot, the 7 known as Noachide laws, or Brit Shel Noach, that all of humanity is bound by. Questions, comments, thoughts so far?
Can you put those mitzvot in the chat or something?
Yeah, I mean, I'd have to pull it out, but I mean, yeah, I can put them in there. Or I can email them to you. One of the two.
Email. Yeah, better.
Other questions, comments so far?
I just want to clarify, the Noahide laws are 7 mitzvot?
I mean, in essence, yes, it's the 7 mitzvot that all of humanity is bound by. Mitzvah is commandment. So, God commands all of humanity to follow these 7 laws. One of which is whoever sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed.
My question is really, maybe I'm misremembering something. I thought there were 10 Noahide laws. Are there 3 somewhere else?
There's 10 mitzvot. There's 10 commandments.
Yeah.
But the Noachide laws are 7.
Oh, okay. My mistake then.
I'm very busy with Googling, and here's just a brief summary of the Noahide laws, just to get it, just so we have not everything we need to know, but it says the descendants of Noah were commanded with 7 precepts to establish laws and the prohibitions of blasphemy, idolatry, adultery, bloodshed, theft, and eating the blood of a living animal.
That's where that comes for kashrut then.
Well, kashrut comes from elsewhere.
No, I just meant the blood part. Is that
No,
not?
that's blood of a living animal. Kashrut also prohibits blood of
Something.
slaughtered animals.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
But everybody is prohibited from consuming the blood of a living animal.
There are no Jewish vampires.
Apparently not.
Apparently not. Didn't know that either.
Good to know.
We're safe when we go to shul. We're safe.
Well, that's why the sign of the cross works against vampires, because they're not Jewish.
Good. Important.
Gonna have to remember that one. Yes, Mickey. You're muted though, so you might want to unmute first. You're muted, so we can't hear you, Mickey. There you go.
The original creation, or you said with Noah that things became finite, people became finite. Was God's original intent that Adam live forever?
So Adam does pass away. I believe he's like, I would have to go back and look. I think he's like 900 years old or 700 years old when he dies. So he does die. But I think, but what I was trying to say was more that God puts a moral limit on humanity, that humans can't do whatever we want, but that there needs to be moral boundaries around us to limit us. However, you do get in the Noah story that God puts a finite time limit on humanity.
That's
life, and says the human life should not be over 100, should not, he puts a limit at 120. It's a little flexible because Noah lives beyond that, Abraham lives beyond that, like a lot of people live beyond that. But but that is where we get where you wish somebody a birthday, you say Ad Mea Vesrin, like may you live to 120, because according to Parshat Noach, that's what the limit on human life is.
120, my father would say.
You prefer the Yiddish. Yeah. I've gotten yelled at a number of times for not knowing Yiddish, so so I'll take your word that that's the same thing. Other questions, comments before we go on? And so it's still on page 10, you get Rabbi Sacks kind of admitting this, right? That what differentiates the world after the flood from the world before is that the terms of the human condition have changed. God no longer expects people to be good because it is in their nature to be so. To the contrary, God now knows that every inclination of the human heart is evil, but still created in God's image. That people aren't going to be good just because the world is good, but people have to wrestle with the evil thoughts in their minds and overcome them.
I was somewhat disturbed actually by that phrase, that every inclination of the human thought is evil.
I agree.
Yeah.
And I was disturbed because it says starting in childhood.
Yeah.
Don't we usually think of little children, like 1-month-old babies, as how could they be evil?
Like tabula rasa, right?
So the rabbis do temper this a little bit, and that's where you get this idea of the two yetzers, the yetzer hara and the yetzer hatov. As I say, the inclination for altruism and the inclination to selfishness. I don't prefer good and bad. I kind of prefer like altruism and selfishness. They say, like, from childhood, yes, we have both of these inclinations. Like, we have this inclination to selfishness, we have this inclination to do bad things, but that we have to temper it and balance it. And that's a large part of what religion, I mean, all religions generally, but particularly mitzvot try to get you to do, is to guide you away from that selfishness and be able to put you on the right path. So yes, I think the rabbis are somewhat disturbed by that also, and try to temper it down to say, yeah, you're not entirely evil, but God recognizes that people do have a bad side to them that they have to then work on and negotiate with.
So this is, I guess y'all can see me now. So it's Diane. There's a behavioral psychologist. His name is Adam Grant. He happens to be Jewish. I don't know. Are you familiar with his book?
I didn't know he was Jewish. I see a lot of his stuff gets shared around to like business practices and life practices.
Right. So in his book titled Give and Take, I think there are studies that show that babies are actually not selfish and not self-centered, and that that behavior is something that children are actually taught, that that from birth we're not the evil persons that we read about in the news today. That behavior is learned and taught and experienced.
Yes, there are a lot of studies that show to Stewart's is it tabula rasa?
Tabula rasa.
Tabula, sorry. My Latin, my daughter's the one learning Latin, not me. Children, much of children's behavior is learned. And even things that we more and more they're finding out that things that we assumed were instinctual are learned behaviors also, in many ways. But getting closer to Cindy's question before, we are, as Rabbi Sacks says, we are social animals. And when one human being thinks he or she has godlike powers vis-a-vis another human being, the result is violence. Therefore, thinking yourself godlike, if you are human, all too human, is very dangerous. Rabbi David Wolpe makes a very similar point and says, more than religion has caused violence, the absence of religion causes more violence.
Mhm.
It's a really fascinating chapter, and I think the book is called Why Faith Matters, which might be another book to read at some point for this group. But his argument is, for all the deaths that people have caused in the name of religion, in the name of God, the deaths that have been caused in the absence of religion, when, they have actively persecuted religion, is far, far, far greater than anything people have done in the name of God. And he lays out the numbers for you too, in terms of communism, Nazism, that other isms that reject religion, that the numbers are kind of staggering as to the number of deaths that they cause. And his argument is that religion actually teaches exactly what Rabbi Sacks is saying, is that we are made in the image of God and you are made in the image of God. And it's the denial of that premise that causes much of the violence. And even if you think of the religion, the violence, I said the wrong way, the violence caused by religion, much of it is based on the idea that I am created in the image of God and you are not. And I think that's a large piece of what we're also seeing now is we are superior, you are inferior to us, and therefore we don't care what we do to you. It's when you start to see other people as not created in the image of God and see other people as inferior to you is when the violence begins.
So then I have a question, Rabbi.
Yes.
Okay, so historically in our Jewish culture, we have not gone out to recruit converts.
Correct.
It appears that that's changing a little bit. But my question is, are there other religions? A little bit. We're at least welcoming to people
We
who
are
want to come in
welcoming, and we're not as openly turning converts away as we once
Right.
were. There's a good historical reason why we were turning converts away. The historical, I do want to hear your question. I just want to kind of clarify.
Okay, so I've already heard your answer in a prior conversation. So my question is, are there other religions that are similar to Judaism's precepts, and that they accept that even though their faith may be right for them, it's not important that if there are people who don't practice their faith, to recognize that whatever faith you practice is good for you?
I'll say broadly, yes. I'm not an expert, but my general impression is Buddhism is kind of in that line.
Yeah.
Buddhism's doesn't really persecute on the basis of, you're not Buddhist, so you're wrong. It's a little challenging because actually I'll put this out. The Unitarian Universalists are pretty much in this line also, of we pull from all the faith traditions because they all have something to teach, and it really doesn't matter who you are or what you believe. It matters that what you're doing and that you have a faith that you believe in.
The friends as well, I would say. Right.
I will say I've had a couple Unitarian Universalist minister friends who have said some of my best congregants are Jews. But there are people out there who say, I don't really care what religion you are. I care that you have a faith, that you believe strongly, and that you act in accordance with that faith. And that's far more important than what it is exactly you believe.
But I mean, historically, Christians do not accept other faiths, right? If you practice a different faith, then you're in trouble, and they care about you and love you, and they want you to open your mind up to their faith, right?
I will say broadly, it kind of depends on the denomination. There are some denominations that are much more in line with that, with what you said. Southern Baptists, for example, are very much, if you're not Southern Baptist, then you're wrong and you're going to hell. But there are others who are much more, Judaism is the original religion. You as long as you're a righteous person, you're a righteous person, and that's all that really matters.
All right, Rabbi, this is a toughie. So everybody on this call, I think, loves our Jewish religion. So would the world be a better place if all people were Jewish, and if not, why?
I'll say broadly two things, or maybe three. We'll see how it goes. Broadly, I think we as Jews need to all be okay with everybody else as Jews before we can get there. As long as we still have people saying the Holocaust happened because of Reform Judaism, or, you're not really a rabbi because you're not Orthodox, or you're not really Jewish because you're not this, or you're whatever it is. I don't want to pick on the Orthodox, but you can go the other direction, that you don't care about people because you're Orthodox, and it's only us non-Orthodox Jews who really care about people. Whatever it is that separates us. Do we really want to bring the whole world into that conversation? Look, I think Judaism has a lot to teach and has a lot for the world to learn. I was teaching my intro class one of my favorite Talmudic teachings from the Talmud, from Masechet Eruvin, which talks about how Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel argued for 3 years about a topic, and then a voice suddenly comes out from heaven and says, "Both of you are right, but the halacha follows Beit Hillel." So the obvious question is, why does the halacha follow Beit Hillel? And it says, because Beit Hillel would teach Beit Shammai's opinion before their own. And I had this thought, and I said to my intro class, how would Congress operate if they did this? How much different do you think Congress would look if the Democrats sat there and said, our Republican colleagues are teaching this, and this is what they believe, and this is why they believe it, and this is how they came to that conclusion, and this is why they're proposing what they're proposing, and this is why we disagree, and how we view the same set of topics, and this is why we believe what we believe. And then the Republicans did the same thing and said, our Democratic colleagues believe X, Y, and Z, and this is how they came to those conclusions, and this is why we disagree, and they can have that kind of conversation. One of my students said, we'd actually have a functional Congress. That was their response. But, that's a really important lesson to kind of consider and to learn, that we clearly haven't picked up yet. So I think that's one, I think Judaism has a lot to learn. If everybody in the world was Jewish, I think we'd be having same conversations we're having within the Jewish community of how are you actually Jewish? How do we know you're Jewish? Are you really Jewish? Do you really believe this? Do we need to believe this to be able to be called, like, and be still having these kind of intra-denominational arguments. It would just be on a wider scale. Do I think that other religions have a lot to teach also? Yes. Do I think that there are things that Jews can learn from other religions? Yeah, I do. I think there's a lot of value and a lot of wisdom in other faith traditions that we can probably learn from also.
All right, so give me one example of what we should adopt in Judaism, perhaps from other religions that we don't have or do now. I hate to put you on the spot, but I love to see your mind at work.
Let me think.
We should give you time to think about that.
Yeah, one that kind of pops into my mind, were you going to say something, Margaret?
Go ahead.
I was going to say that one that kind of pops into my mind now is, I think in some level, Kabbalah kind of dips its toe into this. But if you take the Buddhist concept that this world is merely, a non-attachment to this world, and that there's something more important beyond than just the physical existence that we live in, that's an important lesson for us as Jews too. And there are ways for us to incorporate that concept, that beyond the physical presence of tikkun olam, for example, of repairing the world, which is important. I'm not saying it's not important, but there's a spiritual world beyond this that we too often let go of and get caught up in the physical action of mitzvot at the cost of faith and spirituality.
Okay, you went down the path that I was going down, but a whole lot better. So,
so is there a way? I guess this was my Erev Yom Kippur, my Kol Nidre? I can't remember which one I did, but this was essentially what the argument I made over Yom Kippur is, that your practice should be your practice, and mitzvot are important, and the observance of mitzvot are important, and we should be emphasizing them and we should be doing them, but not for their own sake, but for the sake of reinforcing our faith and reinforcing our spirituality. And as our faith and our spirituality, as we feel more connected to God, that should reinforce our observance of mitzvot beyond that. So coming back to Rabbi Sacks, and coming back to Cindy's question a little bit, is how do we do this now in the kind of world we live in? Because, as Cindy said, it's really great to be able to treat each other as created in God's image. It's really great to treat other people created in God's image. And yes, we need to teach our children to do that. How do we do that when other people won't see us in that same image?
I think I'm going to answer my own question. Can I do that? I'm going to quote that the Jewish scholar Harvey May. The man.
What does Reb Harvey have to teach?
Reb Harvey. Whenever I do, as you say, I jump to I skip the middle and I jump to the end and I get very emotional. He always says, Cindy May, fly above the clouds. Fly above the clouds. And so what I take that to mean, in light of our discussion and in light of how you brought me back down into the is that even when others who I mean, I personally believe that everyone is created in God's image, and I respect the differences in other people. And the challenge becomes, this is where Harvey May comes in, that even when others don't respect us as being created in God's image, we are still required to keep our own humanity. And despite their flaws, because we all are flawed, we still must see them in God's image and move from that place. I guess it's a matter of still respecting our enemies and not bringing ourselves down to that level. How does that sound?
It sounds beautiful, and I'm going to build on it a little bit too.
Okay.
Yes, I do think, just because they don't see us, we, as you said, like, we still need to see them as created in God's image, even if they're not going to reciprocate. Part of the challenge is, how do we educate them beyond that? How do we, or maybe re-educate them? How do we engage them to say what you said, that, we still, I still respect you, I still love you, I still see you in God's image. How can we get them to see us the same way? And, clearly, I don't think, just saying, flying above the clouds, I don't think that's going to change their minds.
No.
But how do we get them back in the fold? And that's a bigger challenge.
That changes my perspective, to bring me to that place where, like you said, that it's incumbent upon me, as Suzanne said, to bring them back in by continually trying to have those conversations. And I can't get to that point unless I fly above the clouds.
Right. And Rabbi Sacks kind of alludes to this also, in that he says we need one another. There's two images I usually go to. One is Rabbi Harold Kushner, is that, the entire world is a puzzle and we're all the individual pieces. And that part of our job is to put the puzzle pieces together through our relationships to build out this giant puzzle of humanity. And, obviously we're not going to put together all the pieces ourselves, but it's our job to put together the pieces that we can in our little sphere of the world. The other image is a little more Kabbalistic, which is that the world, or at least humanity, is one organism in and of itself. And an organism has to work in the doctors will correct my terminology, has to work in a system of stasis. It has to have a balance in it. It has to work, all the pieces need to work together for the organism to survive. What happens when the organism starts attacking itself? What do we call that?
Cancer.
Disease.
Disease, cancer,
Autoimmune disease.
autoimmune disorders. There's a variety of them, but
all this sounds very good, but I think practically Golda said it, and that's that we'll never have peace until they love their children more than they hate us.
Yes. And the question is, how do we get them to love their children more than they hate us? And I don't know if as I've said a couple times to people, if there was an easy answer, we'd have done it already. It's not an easy conversation. It's not an easy solution. But it's on one hand, it's not, it feels wrong. And I think I said this in my sermon last week. Like, it's wrong that we have to sit there and defend ourselves, and it's wrong that we have to be the ones to educate everybody else about why we're not evil. Life's not really fair, and that's just kind of the world we're living in, is we have to do that.
I think Suzanne has given us a great connection to Lech Lecha. And that's because if you're talking about loving your children more than you hate others, how do you teach them to love children, or how you teach your children? And it brings us to Lech Lecha. Are we born with all our impulses, or do we learn our impulses? Is it a biologic source or a cultural source? And I'm just
answer is
from,
yes, by the way.
Yeah, I know it's either one. It's one of the above.
No, it's both, I think. But, but go ahead, and then I'll.
Well, real fast. It takes me to when I was on a study mission. That sounds so Christian. I was studying a study trip in Kuwait and Syria, and you look at in the schools maps where there's a grayed out blob where Israel belongs. And that was, Kuwait had just agreed to have relationships with Israel at that time. Syria didn't agree. And we, as a Jew, I definitely felt it in Syria. But it starts very early, teaching your children to hate that particular, those occupants of that land, which they claim. So I think it's a great seg into Lech Lecha, and I don't mean to push you, Rabbi. Maybe
I say we'll probably need to do Lech Lecha next week, just looking at the clock. But I will say, I'll say two things in response. One is, I was a psychology major in college, and the one thing I remember from abnormal psych was, the question was always, well, is this environmental or is this genetic? Which is essentially the question you're asking. And every single time the answer was both. It's like, there's no psychiatric disorder that has a 100% genetic result and none that have a 100% environmental result. They're both kind of both. Everything's kind of both. Are we born with this? Yes. And our environment bears witness to it too. There's a classic midrashic debate on a phrase at the beginning of Parshat Noach. It says, Noach hayat tzaddik b'dorotav. That Noah was a righteous person in his generation. We talked about this, I think, when we did, for those who did the Hasidic Parshat Shavua last year, we talked about this. Is, what does that mean? Why does it say he was a righteous person in his generation?
The rest of them were worse.
Well, the debate is, was he righteous compared to everybody else, but not compared to other generations? So, like, one argument is like he was righteous in his generation, but if he had lived in Abraham's generation, he would have been like nothing. The other argument is he was righteous because of who he was surrounded by, but if he had lived in a different generation, he would have been even more righteous. Because he would have, in sports terms, you play to the level of the competition, so to speak, right? He would have been righteous at the level of his competition, of everybody else around him. If he had been surrounded by more righteous people, he would have been more righteous, but he wasn't, so he was less righteous because of it. Did he have an inclination to righteousness? Yes. Did his environment affect it? Also, yes. And I think the rabbis are not unaware of this either, which is why they kind of make both arguments. They say both that, we are each born with a Yetzer Hatov and a Yetzer Hara, an inclination for altruism and an inclination for selfishness. And in Pirkei Avot, in a place where there are no men, be a man. Translated literally, like in a place where there's nobody who's really stepping up to be a real person, be that real person, rise above the clouds, as Reb Harvey says. It's both, we have the inclinations, we're surrounded by other people, but we have to rise above that. And we have to teach our kids to rise above that also.
Well, not only is it both, but it can be the entire continuum. I mean, you can have certain problems, issues that are 99% genetic. You can have others that are 99% environmental, but we are learning, scientists are now learning that environmental things can actually change your genetics. So it really is a continuum, and they both affect one another.
Yeah. This kind of brings us back full circle, which is good, with Rabbi Artson, who kind of says, we talk about body and spirit often as a dichotomy, as of two separate things, as if they are separated in the body. But along with what Stuart says, more and more we're learning that the spirit affects the body and the body affects the spirit. That the environment is just as the environment can change our body. When we are spiritually uplifted, our body feels better. And when our body's not feeling good, our spirit kind of drags down with it. And the two are intertwined, just as environment and genetics seem to be more and more intertwined also. Life is interconnected on so many levels that we don't, it's interesting because Judaism's really a religion of distinctions, and you even see it in creation. There's light and there's dark. There's day and there's night. There's land and there's water. There's sky and there's earth. It's separating and creating distinctions. And, the word Kodesh, holy, comes from a root that actually means separated. Like it's distinct from everything else. So in a world full of, if everything is interconnected, how does that actually play into our, things are our world of distinctions? And I think humans naturally categorize and organize in that way. I think that's part of how our brain works, is we kind of put things in this box and this box and this box as a way of, that's how we recognize patterns and our brains just kind of naturally function. But the world is much more integrated than we can usually comprehend. And that's a lesson we still have to learn too. Final questions, comments, thoughts?
And I want to comment on something that was said repeatedly earlier, and that had to do with how are we going to teach them to think differently or to feel differently. And I do not think that it is possible to do that. And I also question whether it is incumbent upon us to do that. I think we have enough to do to teach our own, and I don't know that we can, other than by providing example, that we have any other means of influencing the other.
Yeah. I'll put it this way: if we are all interconnected and we are all descended from Adam, then I hear you, but at the same time, there we can't just let it go either. That feels like a more dangerous option, to just say, forget it. You're not going to learn. I'm not going to teach you. Figure it out on your own. That feels like a more dangerous option than trying to educate people and move people forward to do it. And if it's up to us, who is it up to? Right? If it's not for me, then if it's who's going to do it if it's not us?
So is it intrinsic upon the whole concept of tikkun olam that you have to go out there and actively try to heal the world?
Yeah, I mean, that's the idea of tikkun olam, is that we're bringing the world closer to a period where where the organism is all acting as one.
So I just want to say that I understand what you're saying, Margaret, and it is indeed overwhelming to think that you can teach the most extreme person the idea or the precepts by which we live. So I think that to me, the idea is to find the ones who are in the middle, teetering on the wrong side, and help move them along, and then they will indeed push the other ones along. I don't think you can realistically be hopeful that the most extreme you'll be able to change overnight. It is to take those who are less extreme but on the wrong side. Does this make sense?
I don't think one should throw up one's hands. I just think it's a matter of being realistic, and I think that Diane, you've offered a realistic path.
And as they say in Pirkei Avot, it is not upon Rabbi Tarfon says, it is not upon you to complete the task, but neither are you free to desist from it.
Well, I think part of the problem is that we keep talking about teaching them and changing them, but I haven't heard anybody say anything about understanding where they're coming from and doing things to help them feel like they have a chance to do it a different way.
Yes. Look, I think that's how we teach them and change them and educate them, is you don't do it by, you don't change people by bashing them over the head with what you believe. I was going to make a snarky comment, but I'll keep it to myself. At least when I'm recorded. You change them by, as Rabbi Sacks said, by being in relationship with them, by recognizing that these are puzzle pieces that we need as part of the puzzle, as being parts of our body that we need to bring back into the organism as a whole. Being part of a relationship means you have to also understand where they're coming from and not just be purely defensive about it either. And I'll add, that relationship has to go both ways also. So yes, we have a relationship a responsibility to understand and relate and comprehend where they're coming from. But the relationship also means they need to understand, comprehend, and feel where we're coming from in addition.
And it seems that when you work at it, you're always the one giving up the most. So we know that they feel the same way.
Well, I think we've gone over the entire Torah this week, so I'm not sure what we're going to do next week.
Well, next week we'll try to do Lech Lecha and Vayera. We'll catch up at some point. Don't worry. But yes, we'll try to do Lech Lecha and Vayera next week, and we'll go from there. So, kol hakavod, everybody. Good to talk to and learn from y'all. And next week I will not be here. So the question is, would somebody like to go with, does one person want to do Lech Lecha and one person want to do Vayera and lead the discussion, or do we want to skip and we'll catch up in 2 weeks? I hear crickets.
Well, maybe we can just kind of do it without necessarily having a person responsible, but all think about questions in both of those. Partial without.
I think that's a good idea. It's sort of like where nobody wants to be the photographer at the party, but everybody wants to be at the party. And if everybody takes one picture, then you have a photographer at the party. So if we all come in with one question, then we'll have a nice discussion.
Good. So look, if you
I'll
guys don't get through
volunteer to
both parts,
moderate.
if you guys don't get through both partios, don't worry about it. You know, we will catch up. We'll do two the next time. We'll eventually catch up. Don't worry.
How will we handle the logistics? Margaret, are you able to do that as you did all summer?
I'm sure Howard can do it.
I'll talk to Howard and make sure
Oh, okay.
he at least starts it for you guys and records it. So.
And will he send us the link? Or
I can still send you the link and remind you guys. I just won't be able to be there on Thursday.
Okay, that sounds like a plan.
So Rabbi, I saw the recording. So do you have a recording of last week's?
Yes, I will talk to Margaret about getting both of these uploaded to YouTube.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Sounds good. Be well, everybody. If I don't see you before then, Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
And, look forward to learning with you in 2 weeks then. But have a good
Thank you,
session
Rabbi.
next week.
Thank y'all.
Take
Bye.
care.